Religious institutions and power structures didn't just hide this technique from you, they convinced you it never existed. For thousands of years, the priests of ancient Egypt's houses of life protected a single practice so transformative that initiates emerged from their symbolic death rituals completely changed, impossible to control through fear or manipulation. This wasn't meditation or manifestation. This was about remembering something your soul already knows, but your mind has been trained to forget. What if one method survived under the noses of those who sought to erase it? What you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about who you really are. But first, you need to understand why such extraordinary measures were taken to keep this knowledge from reaching you. Why would entire libraries be burned and scrolls deliberately destroyed if they only contained harmless philosophy? The answer reveals something most people never consider. Certain spiritual practices were systematically eliminated from human history, not because they were false, but because they worked exactly as intended. When you examine the archaeological record closely, a pattern emerges that mainstream historians prefer to ignore. The Orphic schools in ancient Greece developed precise rituals that could shift consciousness in ways that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. They viewed the soul as trapped in the body as part of a purification process, utilizing breathing and trance states to allow the soul to temporarily free itself from its earthly identity and glimpse its divine origin. This experience was considered revealing and irreversible. The Egyptians took these methods even further, creating initiation ceremonies where candidates underwent symbolic death, their bodies resting for hours in specially prepared chambers, while their consciousness was guided through subtle spiritual realms by a master. Upon returning, they were fundamentally changed, having crossed the veil and remembered. In India, the rishis taught the concept of smarana, remembering what the soul already knows. These weren't primitive superstitions or simple meditation practices. They were sophisticated technologies of consciousness that produced predictable results. But here's what happened next. Emerging religious institutions recognized the threat these practices posed to their authority. When people can access divine wisdom directly, they stop needing intermediaries. So instead of destroying the knowledge completely, something far more clever happened. The techniques were replaced with simplified versions that gave people a taste of spiritual experience without the full transformative power. Prayer replaced direct communion. Reading scripture replaced personal revelation. Rituals became empty ceremonies rather than consciousness-altering practices. This suppression wasn't random or accidental. Historical records show that specific techniques were targeted, particularly those that helped people remember their true spiritual nature and become internally guided rather than externally controlled. A person who knows their divine essence can't be manipulated through fear, guilt, or false promises of salvation. They become what authorities throughout history have feared most: individuals who derive their power from within rather than from external systems. What makes this even more intriguing is how fragments of these original practices survived, creating a clear lineage from Egyptian Ba'ath teachings through Orphism to Platonic philosophy. The similarities are too precise to be coincidental. It's as if the same instruction manual was preserved through different philosophical traditions, each maintaining essential elements of the core method. Recent archaeological discoveries have begun to confirm what researchers always suspected. Newly translated texts from Nag Hammadi, discoveries in Tibetan monasteries, and even ancient manuscripts found in European archives all describe similar techniques for what they call soul awakening or divine remembrance. These texts provide step-by-step instructions that read more like precise scientific protocols than religious doctrine. The most fascinating aspect is that these ancient methods are becoming accessible again right at the moment when humanity seems ready for a major shift in consciousness. The technique that emerges from all these fragments involves activating capacities that already exist within every human being, dormant abilities that were never actually lost, just temporarily forgotten. What you're about to discover is that the ancients didn't just preserve these techniques in texts and traditions, they encoded them into something far more permanent and accessible. The structures themselves became living keys to consciousness. The Great Pyramid of Giza wasn't constructed as a tomb. Its inner chambers were designed as activation devices that used specific geometric proportions to trigger dormant memories in those who entered. The Egyptian priests understood something we've forgotten. Certain shapes and mathematical relationships create resonance patterns that can unlock consciousness itself. These weren't random architectural choices. Every angle, every measurement, every corridor was calculated to create what the ancients called divine proportion, geometric relationships that mirror the fundamental patterns underlying all existence. When initiates entered these spaces, they weren't just walking into buildings. They were stepping inside three-dimensional keys designed to turn the locks within their own awareness. The most profound discovery comes when you examine how these geometric patterns were encoded throughout the House of Life chambers. The priests would guide initiates into specially prepared spaces where they would lie in trance states for hours, their consciousness separated from their physical bodies through what they called birth separation. The geometric proportions of these chambers weren't decorative. They were precisely calculated to facilitate this awakening of soul memory. The architecture itself became a technology for consciousness transformation. Recent studies acknowledge that specific geometric arrangements can influence brainwave entrainment, though the detailed mechanisms remain subjects for deeper exploration. What matters is that the ancients discovered these principles thousands of years before modern science began mapping similar territory. The connection runs even deeper when you consider how Plato used geometric symbolism in his allegory of the cave to describe the soul's ascent from illusion to truth. This wasn't coincidence. It was the same understanding that Egyptian priests encoded into their initiation chambers, passed through Orphic traditions into Greek philosophy. The geometric patterns served as guides for consciousness, helping initiates remember their divine nature rather than remaining trapped in limited identity. But here's where ancient wisdom reveals its most practical secret. The same geometric patterns encoded in these temples appear throughout the natural world, in the spiral of our DNA, in the branching networks of our neurons, in the mathematical relationships governing how our hearts beat and our lungs breathe. The builders weren't imposing foreign patterns on consciousness. They were reflecting back the geometry already embedded within us. Every human body contains the same geometric proportions found in the most sacred temples. Your skeletal structure, your organ placement, even the way your nervous system branches through your tissues, all follow the mathematical relationships that ancient builders encoded into their consciousness activation devices. The temple was never separate from you. You are the temple, designed as a living geometric instrument, capable of awakening soul memory when properly aligned with the cosmic patterns that created you. The external geometry was always meant to teach you about the internal temple. Yet something happened to disconnect us from this knowledge, something that wasn't accidental or natural. Ancient masters observed how beliefs and rituals gradually obscured the soul's memory, and they developed counter-techniques to restore what had been forgotten. When you examine the patterns across different traditions, three distinct veils emerge that consistently block access to soul consciousness. These weren't random obstacles, but specific barriers that could be systematically dissolved through precise inner work. The first veil operates through cultural conditioning that programs every individual from birth to identify with external roles rather than their essential nature. Greek philosophers like Plato understood this deeply, describing in the Phaedo how the soul becomes purified by separating from bodily attachments and social identities. You learn to call yourself by names given to you, to define yourself through jobs, relationships, social status, and endless labels that have nothing to do with who you actually are. This conditioning runs so deep that most people spend their entire lives defending identities that were constructed by others. The constant stream of external voices becomes internalized until you can no longer distinguish between authentic inner guidance and programmed responses. But cultural programming only works when combined with the second veil, emotional trauma, that creates energetic blocks throughout your entire system. The Indian practice of smarana, or divine remembrance, required initiates to achieve profound silence and detachment from past experiences that clouded their awareness. These traumas don't just affect your psychology, they create literal interference patterns that prevent access to soul consciousness. Past experiences leave energetic imprints that manifest as internal noise, drowning out the subtle communications from your deeper nature. Every unhealed wound becomes a lock that keeps certain aspects of your awareness sealed away. The third veil operates at an even more fundamental level, through the belief that you exist as a separate entity disconnected from the divine source. The Orphic traditions taught that the soul was imprisoned within the body, creating an illusion of separation from its divine origin. This sense of isolation feels so natural that questioning it seems absurd, yet it represents the deepest form of spiritual amnesia. When you believe you're separate from the creative force that brought you into being, you automatically start seeking fulfillment through external means, rather than recognizing the unlimited source of wisdom flowing through your own consciousness. During the religious wars and institutional consolidations of power, the shift from inner spiritual experience to rigid external dogma strengthened these veils across entire populations. Educational systems reinforced identity-based thinking, social structures amplified emotional wounding, and religious institutions promoted separation between human and divine. What the ancient masters understood is that these veils exist as temporary illusions rather than permanent barriers. Mystery School initiates learned specific dissolution techniques that could remove each veil through precise inner work rather than years of struggling against them. The veils don't need to be fought or gradually worn away because they have no real substance. They're patterns of energy that dissolve when exposed to clear awareness. The most profound teaching reveals that the veils aren't obstacles preventing you from reaching your true nature. They're protective mechanisms that automatically dissolve when you remember who you really are at the soul level. The forgetting was temporary, designed to dissolve at the exact moment when you're ready to reclaim your authentic spiritual power. But this remembering requires more than understanding. It requires activation of something that already exists within your physical form. Your body contains a literal resonance chamber that can activate memories your soul has carried across lifetimes. This isn't metaphorical language or spiritual poetry. Ancient mystics mapped specific locations within the human form that function as portals to higher consciousness. These areas exist in your physical body right now, waiting to be awakened through techniques that were once known only to temple initiates who spent years learning how to access them safely. The mystery schools discovered that certain regions within your torso create internal vibrations when activated through precise methods. These aren't chakras or energy centers as commonly understood today, but actual anatomical locations that generate frequencies capable of shifting consciousness into expanded states. Egyptian initiates called this internal space the chamber of the Ba, where the soul could separate from ordinary awareness and remember its true nature. They understood that wisdom comes to those who learn to cross the threshold between physical and spiritual perception while remaining fully alive. The ancient Egyptians discovered that the Ba, your soul's manifestation, could only emerge when the body entered profound stillness through trance states. This wasn't passive meditation, but active concentration of soul forces into unity, allowing the bar to experience itself independently of physical form. The priests understood that your soul needed the body to become completely inert before it could recognize its own independence and define itself against the physical vessel that was subject to death and decay. Temple initiates learned that the chamber connects your heart center to the crown of your head through internal pathways that could be awakened through specific breathing patterns combined with focused attention. The Egyptian texts describe how guided breathing and silent ritual enabled the bar's emergence, creating conditions where the soul could ascend to unite with cosmic consciousness. When properly engaged, this pathway allows direct access to what the Egyptians called the Akash, the luminous spiritual essence that connects your individual awareness to universal wisdom. The most remarkable aspect involves the actual transformation that occurs when the resonance chamber activates properly. Ancient texts describe how accomplished practitioners could enter this resonant state and receive direct communication from what they understood to be their eternal nature. The soul would speak through internal knowing rather than words, providing guidance and revealing purposes that extended far beyond the current lifetime. The chamber served as a communication device that allowed the temporary personality to receive transmissions from the immortal aspect of consciousness that continues across different incarnations. What makes this technique particularly powerful is that the resonance chamber has been active throughout your entire life, but tuned to survival frequencies rather than soul frequencies. Your nervous system constantly monitors threats and opportunities in your immediate environment, keeping the internal vibrations focused on physical safety and social adaptation. The ancient method simply retunes this natural capacity to receive signals from deeper levels of consciousness that carry information about your authentic spiritual purpose. The chamber doesn't add anything foreign to your consciousness, but removes the interference that prevents you from hearing the voice of your own soul. Yet accessing this sacred communication requires more than understanding the concept. It demands following a precise sequence of steps that mystery schools refined across thousands of years into a single coherent method. The complete technique emerges from thousands of years of refinement across different mystery schools, each contributing pieces that form a single coherent method for awakening soul memory. What you're about to receive isn't theoretical knowledge, but practical instructions that initiates once guarded with their lives because they understood the irreversible transformation that follows successful activation. Preparation requires creating internal and external conditions that allow your consciousness to shift beyond ordinary awareness without interference from daily concerns or environmental distractions. You need complete privacy for at least 30 minutes in a space where you won't be interrupted. Remove anything that connects you to external obligations, phones, clocks, or reminders of responsibilities. The physical environment should feel neutral rather than charged with personal associations that might pull your attention outward during the process. The timing and sequence matter more than most people realize because each stage builds upon the previous one in ways that can't be skipped or rearranged. Attempting the technique incorrectly won't cause harm, but it won't produce the activation either. The method works through precise internal alignment that dissolves specific barriers in a particular order. Random spiritual practices might create pleasant experiences, but they won't trigger the deep recognition that transforms your relationship with your own consciousness permanently. Stage 1 begins with breathing patterns that shift your nervous system out of survival mode and prepare the resonance chamber for activation. The preserved ritual descriptions from Nag Hammadi manuscripts and Tibetan monastery discoveries provide step-by-step instructions that reveal the exact rhythms used by ancient initiates. Draw breath in through your nose, allowing your belly to expand fully while keeping your chest relatively still. Hold this breath briefly, then exhale through slightly parted lips for a longer count. feeling your entire torso relax and settle. This rhythmical pattern of shorter in-breath, pause, and extended out-breath mirrors the Orphic breathing techniques that alter consciousness states and begin opening the internal pathways between your heart center and the crown of your head. Stage 2 engages visualization techniques that activate sacred geometry patterns within your consciousness, using focused imagination to create internal structures that mirror the designs of ancient temples. Picture the Egyptian solar triangle forming in the space between your heart and throat, representing the Baka-Ak triad that connects your soul essence to divine consciousness. As you maintain this image, breathe light into the triangle until it becomes luminous and begins pulsing with your heartbeat. The triangle acts as a geometric key that unlocks dormant capacities within your nervous system. Stage 3 involves invoking your soul's true vibration, not through spoken words, but through spontaneous toning that emerges naturally from your deepest essence. This aligns with descriptions of AKH resonance found in the pyramid texts, where sound becomes a bridge between human and divine consciousness. Allow a tone to arise organically from your chest without forcing any particular pitch or volume. The sound might feel unfamiliar, yet completely authentic, as if you're remembering something you've always known. Continue toning until the vibration spreads throughout your entire body, creating harmonic resonance within the geometric structure you've visualized. Stage 4 represents the crucial moment of surrender, where your ordinary sense of self dissolves and soul memory floods into awareness. As the toning continues, maintain the solar triangle visualization while releasing all effort to control what happens next. Your breathing may shift naturally, your body might feel weightless or heavy, and your perception of time and space may alter dramatically. Allow whatever arises to flow through you without judgment or analysis. This is when the veils dissolve and direct recognition of your eternal nature becomes undeniable. The integration phase determines whether the activation creates lasting transformation or remains a temporary experience. After the intensity subsides, spend several minutes consciously anchoring the memories and insights that emerged during the process. Document any guidance or knowing that came through without editing or questioning its validity. Maintain curiosity about what unfolds in the days following your practice. The permanent changes occur when you consistently operate from the consciousness that awakened during the protocol, rather than treating it as a separate spiritual experience. What happens next extends far beyond personal transformation into something that affects everyone around you. When one soul awakens to its true nature, something far more significant happens than personal transformation. Ancient teachers understood that each awakened soul radiated remembrance to others, creating a chain reaction that could illuminate entire communities. Plato described how philosopher kings naturally inspired others toward wisdom through their transformed presence, while Egyptian texts reveal that one Akh could illuminate others in the afterlife through its luminous essence. This wasn't wishful thinking, but a documented phenomenon that explains why certain knowledge was carefully guarded across different mystery traditions. Awakened souls operate on frequencies that naturally inspire others to question their programmed limitations and remember their divine essence. They don't need to preach or convince anyone of anything, because their presence alone activates dormant memories in those ready to receive. People around them begin experiencing spontaneous insights, increased synchronicities, and an inexplicable knowing that there's more to existence than they've been taught. The awakened person becomes a living reminder of what's possible when someone remembers who they really are beyond all the roles and identities society imposed upon them. The technique is surfacing now because recently translated Nag Hammadi texts reveal that ancient masters anticipated periods when soul awakening would resurface at critical historical moments. These manuscripts describe how preserved wisdom would emerge precisely when humanity reached a tipping point between unconscious living and spiritual remembrance. Today, millions of people feel deep dissatisfaction with existing systems and hunger for authentic spiritual experience rather than second-hand religious teachings. When someone successfully activates their soul memory through this protocol, their entire reality field begins shifting in ways that extend far beyond personal healing or insight. Their relationships transform as they attract people who resonate with their authentic frequency, while those operating from unconscious patterns naturally drift away. Opportunities align with their true purpose rather than their programmed desires. Even their physical environment seems to respond differently, as if reality itself reorganizes around their elevated consciousness. These aren't coincidences, but natural consequences of aligning with the creative force that governs all existence. The signs of successful activation become unmistakable once you know what to look for. Awakened individuals develop unshakable inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. They receive clear guidance through intuition rather than endless mental analysis. Synchronicities increase dramatically as their personal will aligns with cosmic intelligence. They feel profound compassion for others without losing discernment about healthy boundaries. Most importantly, they know beyond doubt that they are eternal spiritual beings temporarily expressing through human form. This process is already happening globally as increasing numbers of people rediscover their true spiritual nature through various paths and practices. Each person who practices this soul activation technique becomes a beacon that helps others remember their divine essence without saying a word about spirituality. Their transformed presence speaks directly to the soul memory of everyone they encounter, creating an unstoppable chain reaction of awakening. The Orphic and Hermetic traditions taught that this collective remembering was inevitable once enough souls reclaimed their authentic power. If you've felt synchronicities or inner guidance after trying aspects of this method, share your experience in the comments below. Your awakening contributes to something far greater than personal transformation, something that has been waiting within you all along. The ancient masters understood that soul memory lives within the Ba'ach triad, accessible through disciplined inner alignment that Egyptian and Orphic traditions refined across millennia. This technique was never truly lost because it exists within the fabric of your consciousness, waiting for the moment when you're ready to remember what your soul already knows. The activation protocol works because it removes interference rather than adding foreign elements to your awareness. Every breath carries the potential for this awakening when properly directed through the geometric pathways that connect your individual consciousness to universal wisdom. Leave one specific insight you'll focus on today in the comments below. Subscribe if you're ready to explore more ancient soul techniques that were preserved for moments exactly like this. What if this practice not only changed your life, but reshaped the world around you?